I know I have spoken about guidelines on some of my posts recently, but I just wanted to do a specific post on it because it's so important. So in terms of during your pregnancy, you will get lots of different advice for different things or different recommendations based on guidelines. So these guidelines can come from the hospital that you're booked at. They can come from NICE guidelines. They can come from like RCOG guidelines, so Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. They can come from lots of different places. So these guidelines, when they're created, they look at the evidence and the research that's available at that time, and they put them together as a working group. So what they are, by their very definition, they are there to guide. So they are there as a guide for employees or for professionals to give advice or recommendations. It's not a rule book. They are not enforceable. And what's important to understand is that the information that is used to create these guidelines, so the research, the evidence, it can change. And there isn't research and evidence into everything. And also it often, if you look into guidelines and you look at the research that's behind them, you'll see that some recommendations are based on, poor or very poor research, just because there's nothing else available. So people talk about, gold standard guidelines, when yes, they might be the gold standard in terms of what's available, but that doesn't mean that they are the be all and end all. It doesn't mean that they are based on good quality research. So what can happen between when they are created and when you're pregnant, when you're being advised, when you're being given these recommendations, is things can change. We can get new information, we can learn, we can have there can be new updated research, and the guidelines take time to change. It's not just done overnight. So when you're being recommended something routinely based on some guidelines, make sure that you ask questions about it and don't just accept that that's the guideline, so that's what it must mean. And also from like a midwives or obstetric perspective, just because it says it on the guideline, it doesn't mean that it's the best thing for the woman, and it doesn't mean it's based on the most recent research. It's really, really important that we remember that. That research can change very quickly, and we can get access to information that can completely change a woman's care plan or her choices, and making sure that that's available to people so that they can make the choices that are right for them. So I just feel like I really wanted to share this because it's something that I experience a lot as an independent midwife. So as an independent midwife, I use the NICE guidelines, but I don't just use them on face value. I will explore them. I will look at the full guideline, and I will look at the recommendations and break it down and look at the research that those recommendations are based on, and then have a conversation with my client based on that. So I often look after women who are opting to go against the guidelines because they're not what's right for them, or they will question them. An example, and I learnt this early on, this was a really powerful lesson, is a woman that I was looking after asked me for what the research is on listening into baby's heartbeat every 15 minutes during active labour and every 5 minutes during the pushing stage, And I just knew that it was the NICE guidelines. At the time, I wasn't aware of what the actual research was, so I did a lot of digging and I spent a lot of time trying to find this research. And what I found out was that there isn't any, because it would be sort of unethical to test it, I think. But so where this recommendation came from, because there isn't the research, is a group of professionals, a clinical experts got together, and from all different fields, so midwifery, obstetrics, neonatology, they all got together and they discussed it. And together, as a working group, they came up with the recommendations. So that doesn't mean that they are not worth anything, but it means that it's very different to it being evidence-based. So yeah, that was a really important lesson for me to learn early on in my career, and it really made me realise the value of actually exploring what the guidelines say and not taking them for face value, because more often than not, when you really share what they actually mean and they break them down, women can change their mind about things. It can open up other options to them, and help them to make choices that are right for them and feel in control of them as well. So have you ever gone against the guidelines? If you're a midwife or a doula, if you supported women who have birthed outside the system, or who have, you know, opted to create different plans that didn't choose to go with what the guidelines said. It's a common thing for me. It's something that has been a huge part of my learning, and constantly learning, actually, because constantly new things are coming up. You know, new medical conditions that, you know, perhaps I've not dealt with before, that are quite rare, or perhaps a piece of research might change. So it's something that I seem to be dealing with quite often, and certainly in terms of helping my clients to know that guidelines aren't rules. They're not the law. You don't have to abide by them, and neither do you as midwives. When I was a newly qualified midwife, I remember being told that a guideline said something, so I had to do it, and the woman said no, and I gave her the option to say no. I didn't tell her that I had to do something. I spoke to her about what the research was and what the guideline was and why it was being recommended, and she said no. And I remember saying that to the midwife that I was working with, and being told that I was radical. And yeah, fine, I will happily take being a radical midwife. However, supporting a woman's choice who doesn't want to do what the guidelines say and wants to be treated as an individual is not radical, and it's a problem when that is seen as radical. It's a real problem, and it's something that we should address, because every single midwife out there should be giving women the opportunity to be treated as individuals and to have a choice. It's not radical to do that. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you. If you've got any questions, as always, do get in touch.